Gotcha.
Okay, I think we're live. Hello, this is Jeff. I'm here with Eric from Canada, right?
That's right.
And
Yep,
we're gonna
Alberta. Um,
Alberta.
yeah.
What province is that?
So that's Canada's Texas. Alberta.
Oh,
So
Alberta is the
Calgary is
province.
in Alberta. The city is Calgary. Yeah, province is Alberta. It's uh, the most conservative Canadian province. So
Oh,
not that conservative, but
yeah,
but by Canadian standards, it
relative.
is. We're all regarded as a bunch of right wing rednecks living in the woods that only care about oil.
Oh, wow. I,
That's
in
what
my
that's what
impression of
Canada thinks
Canada,
of
they regard everybody that way. That's not part of.
it. There's some truth to that.
Well, thank you for coming on. We're going to talk about mental health and kind of some of your personal experience with mental health and whatever else comes up. So, if you want, you can introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Sure. Um, so I am Master Eric Nori. I'm gonna gloat just because I literally just finished my master's degree
Oh,
last
congratulations!
week. Thank you,
In what?
thank you. So I'm still pretty stoked on that. Yeah, it's in um, community health sciences, which is like health research,
Hmm.
and then specifically like kind of refugee health, and we can kind of get into that stuff. So that's what my new new fancy master's degree is in, and my undergrad is in psychology. Um, I've also done. I worked at mostly at the front desk of a clinic for a primary care clinic for refugees for about 10 years. Though I also did, I was in a clinical quality improvement role for a little while there as well. So I was getting paid to kind of measure outcomes and then try to like reduce them, like no show rates, delays of time until their next available appointment, all sorts of things like that. And pretty extensive, history of my own personal health struggles. But I guess in a nutshell, in from 2010 to 20 end of 2013, a lot of depression kind of going on there, and a couple other times in my life as well. But yeah, depression that I had counseling for, ADHD, a little bit of anxiety kind of chucked in for good measure, but mostly depression and ADHD being the big two for me.
Did it just get to a point where you decide to seek help? Or?
Um, so I'd say no, it reached a bit of like I didn't really seek help until after I dropped out of university, because it just all seemed so pointless at the time in 2010, and then I started seeking help. Well, then also, we are just kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what worked, kind of thing. So yeah. And my first few counselors were not well. My first counselor, anyways, was not that great. I also didn't really have enough experience with counselors to realize that she wasn't
Hmm.
that great. In fact, it was in one of my university courses in my undergrad when I was like learning about. I was like, oh, um, CBT is only meant to be like 10 sessions, right? Even for depression, and there should be at the very least there should be some sort of plan. It's like in terms of what does the end kind of state of the counseling kind of look like? When were we done? And we hadn't ever had that conversation. My counselor at the time there and I, and so it was like, oh, and then I had like counselors afterwards that were way better than that, but didn't really know. Um, yeah, there was a few things that my first counselor was just not great at her job.
Oh, yeah, far too often.
Yeah.
How does it work in Canada? Do you, because the healthcare is a little different there? Do you show up at a specific clinic and then you get whatever counselor is on staff, or are you able to select and choose counselors that might
So for
fit
the
your needs?
most part, um, like mental health isn't really part of the of the Canadian healthcare system. Like technically there are mental health um workers like in the hospital and stuff, but like they like in the emergency department, you can see a a psychiatrist, I guess, but like they're just kind of so overwhelmed that because the system's not really created for it, that for the most part, when people think about mental health in Canada, it's like it's just kind of private sort of businesses and stuff, and not as much a part of the actual public healthcare system.
So you have
So
to
like,
kind of seek it out on your own.
yeah, you usually have to seek it out on your own, and yeah, pay like maybe $170 an hour or something like that, or
Oh,
I mean, it's a sliding scale, but that's what it is. Yeah, that's what I'm paying actually. Um, yeah, it's I don't know, your mileage may vary, but it also, and like you can get some amount of free counseling, but like any of the free counseling is just so, they're just so swamped, right? And then
hmm.
um when you're one of like 2,000 um you know clients or patients for this one counselor, if it's free, right, then just by definition you're not really going to get as great care as you might otherwise. You could try, but like, it, like it's hard to remember 2,000 different people. Yeah.
And that's just in your area.
Yeah, like so but when I was that last bit in terms of like, I was thinking about like what kind of free services do have I heard of, and then it's like, well, I know at the university they do, but like, yeah, like that one, like there's, I don't know, 10,000 people at the university, right? And so if there's like I don't know, five, rotating counselors, maybe there's a few more there. It might be somewhere around there though. Like, the math is just brutal there, but it's free, so it's better. I guess it's better than nothing, but be really nice if we actually had standards when it comes to mental health care and saw it in a similar way to physical health care.
Yeah, that's kind of how they're trying to do it here, to varying degrees of success depending on where you go. But the ideal is to have the parity between the two.
Yeah.
One thing I'm interested in that, and it might be helpful to hear, is now that you have more experience in kind of finding counselors, what do you look for? Like when you're a first time person that's never entered the mental health system before, how would you find a counselor that works for you and what to avoid? What
Yeah.
is good counseling and therapy? How to recognize it when you get it?
Yeah. So you got to, um, there's a few criteria, I guess. Let's write down a couple as I go here. Um, so I think having a counselor who can see the world in a, how you see the world. They don't, and usually it's better if they sort of default to that. So like if you're someone like me who does like to look at the world in different sort of ways, maybe I'm trying to look particularly analytic, and then other times like, I realize that I've been kind of overly focused on the analytic, which is not great if you haven't if your emotions are reacting to something in a non-rational kind of way, as emotions often do. Emotions aren't particularly rational. Sometimes they align, but a lot of times they don't, and therefore, you need someone to. And then, so, anyways, but so like I take a lot of different lenses to look at the world. So it's great when a counselor can kind of do that. But or if if you're just if you're like a person whose primary way of looking at the world is through, what your religion says, for example, you can, if you find a counselor that can do that as well, that'll work. But like if your counselor is insisting that you have to view the world through a particular lens, you know, then, and you disagree, then you're probably just not going to get off the jump. You're not getting off on the right foot. If that's the case. And I've only had, well, I guess actually sort of twice that happened. Like, yeah, it was my first counselor. I also had another counselor at one point who like was actually a really like, very compassionate, like kind of good at his job, but didn't see the world how I, or at least it's okay if they don't see the world how I see the world, but you need to be able to understand how I'm seeing the world in order to help me, right? If we're looking at sort of different maps and that we're giving me directions through, then then it's just chance if I end up going in the right direction, right? If you're like,
Right.
go, yeah. um, so I think that's one thing. And especially in psychology, I guess part of it is that like we there's three like totally kind of contradictory and totally at least mostly totally plausible kind of theories as far as I see it in terms of how we actually understand psychology. You'll have some people convinced that genetics has nothing to do with it, and you'll have some people convinced that genetics is the only relevant variable. And what's interesting is that you can actually glean interesting insights from both sides there, even if and of course you'll have plenty of people who think it's a mix of both. But even there's plenty of debate. But like, there's nothing that's that certain in terms of psychology, I think. And so I think at this point, it kind of makes sense to be a bit of a pragmatist when it comes to counseling and go with what works. I guess that's what I'm saying is, find the stuff that works for you. And it's okay if it's something kind of weird, like it's even, I don't know. I've started to go to church a bit, which is kind of wild for me. I didn't grow up religious at all. Like I just did not have that in my life. And actually, I didn't really want it for a long time. But now I've started to do it because that's just one more source of strength that I can pull from. It's like, oh, it's just kind of at this point in my life, it's all upside because I'm not really in danger of letting that affect my decision. Like I very much think that we should let unto God what is God, and unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I don't like to mix that kind of stuff for me, which is great because then I can still go about my life, and if I need an extra kind of source of strength to pull from, church is kind of solid that way. And for me, it's not even necessarily for other people. Like I was on a road trip with a woman, and she was like looking at the numbers on the sides of houses and to do a little kind of numerology stuff, which is not my cup of tea, but it was sort of interesting seeing that she's like, oh, there's 777 or anything. I'm gonna have a good day or something, and it's like, huh, like. She's her day is being brightened by some numbers here, and she's and I haven't seen her be like, oh, it says 777. I should buy a lottery ticket. I should buy all the lottery tickets until I win. Like nothing like that. And so as long as you're, getting the strength from it while still recognizing, the role that our intuition and logic and all that stuff should play, to me it seems all right. So that's one way in which pragmatism, actually, just seeking out what works in counseling or in faith or what have you.
Based on like the alleviation of whatever symptoms you went there for in the first place.
Yeah.
It's probably subjective.
Yeah, it is. And I think eventually we'll get a better understanding of how mental health works. But for now, like if something's working for you, awesome. And if it's not, like, even in terms of like these of like our diagnoses and stuff, like the DSM-5 is still like we're starting to get there, but man, it is like it's far from polished. We
Oh
didn't
yeah.
have any spectrums in the DSM until version 5, and now it's only personality disorders are on a spectrum, even though it's like, well, is there any good reason to say that mood disorders, like bipolar disorder, for example, is is not on the spectrum, but borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, are on the spectrum? And it's like, no, we just kind of got around to the second ones first, even though it's pretty conceivable that some people experience, bipolar um, disorder, to a stronger degree, or they have
Mhm.
less, resilience to it, or however one wants to frame it. It's it's there's no good reason why it has to be you either have it or you don't for those ones, right?
Yeah, I'm not. I've talked about the DSM before too. I'm not a big fan of it. To me, it's an
Yeah,
insurance coding manual more than anything else.
yeah, exactly.
You had mentioned the ADHD, and were you able to find someone that like knew how to incorporate that into mental health or work with that part of you as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually a big part of my counseling. Um, I think throughout most of my life, my parents did a pretty good job, but when it comes to ADHD, especially in the 90s, the conversation just kind of started and ended um, uh, at medications, basically, right?
Oh,
Like just, yeah. And I think there's so much more to ADHD, including
oh yeah.
just like why, um, how how it presented that the problem that we wanted to treat was me procrastinating things. And I procrastinate things, I put things off for a lot of different reasons. And indeed, one of those reasons probably does have to do with having, a shorter attention span most of the time, unless I'm hyper focused than other people. So fair enough. But other times I'm putting things off. And so if I'm putting things off because of attention span stuff and you can give me medication and I'm more focused, then that's great. But the problem is sometimes I put things off because I don't think I can do them, and I'm just kind of experiencing all kinds of um, just feelings of inadequacy and whatnot. And I bring that up because the treatment to that is not Ritalin. You can
Mhm.
give me as much Ritalin as you want, um, but I'm not going to focus on the problem if I don't, if I just truly just don't believe that I can do it, right? And so in that case, the treatment is actually something more like validation, and then I can actually go get it done. And there's you know other reasons that I put off things, and it's if you're treating the wrong problem, then you're not going to fix it, or if you do fix it, it's going to be due to luck, right? Ritalin isn't the answer for everything with regards to putting things off. Um, Another example in terms of like how medication is kind of limited, and again, though, I do think that if it works for you, fantastic. um, but where was I going there? Another example of how oh yeah, is that if you find a drug that makes you focus, um, you also don't necessarily get to choose what you focus on. So like one time I really needed to study, and so I took my like Concerta, which I hadn't taken for a bit. But then some thought about like what it would take to achieve world peace floated through my head, and then boom, then the medication kicked in, and for like 6 hours when I knew I should have been studying, I was focused on solving world peace, in terms of what my mind was doing, and that was
Did
not
you solve it?
unfortunately, not quite.
Oh,
Maybe I'll just, maybe need to up my dosage, I guess. Um, yeah, I was focused, but I hadn't been focused on the right thing, and so I just focused on, just this something that, and then I just lost 6 hours of time, right, by when I could have been studying in theory, or could have been studying on stuff that's not world peace when that's not what I was you know, taking or
so you
anything.
weren't able to redirect your
I
focus at will.
wasn't. And I'm sure some people are better with that, right? It's all that whole delayed gratification and things like that are all kind of, I guess it's all just kind of conscientiousness. There we go. And I think I kind of struggle with conscientiousness. I make up for it in terms of like sort of tenacity and stuff, and just kind of not um like giving up kind of things. But I would make things a lot easier for myself if I had a bit more conscientiousness. And it's something that I think like some of my friends don't really get, like you can, because at the end of the day, we can only see the world through our own eyes in some way or another, I suppose. So because yeah, like some people just don't understand. Like, well, why wouldn't you just focus on on the task at hand, right? Or it's like, well, why wouldn't you just do that? Or like, if you're ever not, if you're ever doing something that you shouldn't, you always have a choice to just not do that. And it's like, I don't know if it's as easy as just that. And like we were talking about how more things should be on spectrums, and I think our kind of conscientiousness are on spectrums. So it's not just that we, and including free will itself. I think that whatever the most accurate framing of the sort of free will debate actually is, there has to be different degrees to free will, right? And I think that also, I think it does make sense to think about that both philosophically and in terms of what that means for mental health stuff. If some people, like, I basically lock myself in the library more or less when I need to actually get stuff done. Even if I'm going to spend 90% of the time procrastinating, I still want to be there for the 10% of time. So I'm in the computer chair the 10% of the time when I actually am able to
Oh yeah.
to focus. Yeah.
And there are constraints to our will, like even if it is relatively free, we
Yeah.
have human limitations to it. We have someone in the comments that's wondering if you've taken the Big Five test and gotten a conscientiousness score.
Yeah. Taking Big Five. I also went to University of Calgary, and there's another model of personality, which is the Hexaco model, and my professor at University of Calgary is one of the kind of two founders of that. The other guys at University of Toronto. But anyways, but they also are very much down with the Big Five. And yes, I have been low. I'm speaking to actually the fact that it's low conscientiousness is definitely one of my big ones. But it's I scored higher in other ones, and I forget what it was. Actually, I think it was just different traits within conscientiousness that, like, some of them I was low, and others I was very high on to make up for it. And it had something to do with like just that sort of not giving up kind of aspect. But I forget what the specific trait within conscientiousness.
Are you talking about the subfacets?
Yeah. Because conscientiousness is one of the Big Five, I guess, which I think the acronym is like ocean, openness to experience, extroversion, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and agreeableness. There we go. Yeah, we figured it out. But within each of those five categories, there's a lot of sub things within there. They all kind of cluster around those five components.
Do they give you the individual facets? Because I'm the same. I'm low in conscientiousness, but when I look at the individual facets, I'm like, but I do that really well. But I'm really good at this. But I'm really good at this. So each individual subfacet, I'm high in specific facets, but it still overall my conscientiousness is low.
Yeah.
It says competence, organized, dutifulness. I guess I'm low in that. Achievement, striving, self-discipline. A little low in that, and deliberation. But I feel like I'm high in most of them, and I'm low in a few of them. But that gives me an overall low conscientiousness for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's roughly the same for me as well. Actually, conscientiousness was the only one I scored below average on. But like you're saying, in some of the sub ones, I'm actually very high in. But overall low in conscientiousness because I'm just less orderly and all sorts of things. So there's
I find it helpful to get more granular with
exactly.
It sounds like you're doing, like, you're working really well, doing the best you can with whatever consciousness you have, And it
Yeah,
also sounds like you have a lot of self-awareness to go along with it too.
right.
Um,
Thank you.
were you identified in school, or is this something you discovered as an adult?
So it's kind of when we're talking about ADHD there, I think technically what happened was um I actually had a bunch of testing when I was really young, like about 5 or 6, because I had some seizures when I was a kid, and
Oh,
yeah, and so it was like, oh, let's, and my parents were doctors, and so they had all the connections in terms of how to like follow up, to the nth degree on this. And for all of those tests, I think the tests were really limited actually at the time. This would have been
what?
like early 90s.
Oh, okay.
Um,
That's what I was gonna-
and the tests all said I didn't have ADHD, but it was because like we didn't have I didn't grow up with a TV, and we can only uh play like on the computers on weekends. Um and so when the test is like, oh, hit the button when when the plus sign comes up on the screen, that's like, oh, this is like a game, and I don't get to normally do this, and I can hyper focus on that. And so I think that's actually why I was not diagnosed with ADHD until like high school. But even then, like, yeah, how we define, yeah, ADHD is a weird one in terms of to what degree it actually exists. And I do think, yeah, to me, it just kind of comes back to my early pragmatism point of like,
Hmm.
if the diagnosis works for you, or if it's giving you if it lets you, act as medication that works for you, then awesome. And if not, then not so much. Because like even, because I think you're in the U.S. So right, like Canada and the U.S. like are responsible for, it's something like some crazy high 90s%, or at least, yeah, something like 90% of diagnoses of ADHD. Now, part of that is because we use the DSM, and Europe uses the I guess it's
ICD-9.
ICD.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't think ADHD is in. It might be an ICD-10, but I think it's not in the ICD-9. Um, and so part of it is just that, but also um like mankind, I think, has got along pretty well without an ADHD diagnosis. So in a way, we're kind of, I don't know, I go back and forth on to what degree I actually think it has that much, legitimacy of a thing. We also don't even really know what causes it, like it, because like a lot of the ways that screen time has changed over the last 30 years, right? And as diagnoses of ADHD have gone up, but it also might be more like a whole, the classic, oh, left-handedness sort of thing. Maybe now, we're just we're just better at diagnosing it, kind of thing. But there's a lot of mystery around ADHD and ADD right now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mystery around all of it. Autism,
Yeah,
ADHD, and I don't the categories are fuzzy and I don't find them very helpful in my
yeah,
work. I tend to focus on individual traits, whatever they're called, whether it's autism, ADHD, what are the traits and how are they impacting your life and what
yeah,
strategies do
exactly.
we need to develop to help you have the best advantage that you can.
Well said. Um, can you tell me more about what you do? I haven't had a chance to really check
Oh,
out
I'm what's
my
called a
research.
peer counselor. I work in mental health, mostly trauma. I just started my own coaching practice for neurodiv all men really, but with a focus on neurodivergent men, gifted,
Yeah,
ADHD,
yeah,
autistic, whatever. Like I said, the labels to me don't really
yeah,
matter.
yeah,
But it's people that are weird and different and have a hard time. They're underserved. They have a hard time finding the people that get them. So
yeah.
I really like working with that population.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Exactly like you said. The labels are fuzzy. They have their uses, so fair enough. But we don't want to define everything by that just because we like, which we're not doing. But I'm saying that I'm glad it sounds like we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, and we're all so different anyway. Like you
Yeah,
have your particular profile, and somebody else 5 other people may identify as ADHD, and when I get to know them, they're going to all be completely different than the way you present. So
Exactly.
it's so individualized.
Yeah. And like it's kind of unfortunate too, the even just the history of psychology, um like sort of it was almost inevitable that we went that way, because um the first few, like, mental illnesses that we were able to kind of categorize and treat, ended up being way more straightforward, I would say, than most of it. Because I think there's sort of two generations of psychotropic medicine, and like the first stuff is like, stuff to treat schizophrenia. I forget what the name of those are, but and that, for the time, that worked actually like quite well, considering that there hadn't really been anything before. And then and schizophrenia was not that well understood at the time. And then like the first major psychotropic success was like, yeah, schizophrenia. Then and then they were able to like drastically change, institutionalization rates and stuff, because suddenly you were able to control this to this, huge degree. And it was only natural, I think, for a lot of scientists at the time to think that things would continue that way. And then they didn't. Nothing else ended up really being that similar to schizophrenia that way, where like you can kind of, like, I would even say like SSRIs, to treat depression, just not nearly as effective, for example, and still like effective. But depression, um, is one of those things where there's multiple causes of it, versus schizophrenia. Like the biomedical answer is actually a fairly complete answer. To whereas for the most part, we should move away from the biomedical model to a more biopsychosocial model. But it happened to work out pretty well for that first one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did so as far as your own personal kind of recovery and journey, was it just the simple answer of finding the right therapist and the right combination of medication?
No. I think one, it was so it like the right therapist definitely helped a lot, especially kind of later on. But also like the first thing that really changed it for me was like my friend just kind of taking the goodness of her heart, you know, like getting me an interview for this job that I didn't feel like I deserved, and so I would have self-sabotaged myself, as I had done many times until that point, except that now it wasn't me that would be the only one, like kind of suffering if if I kind of screwed this job up. It would be my friend who
Mm.
suggested me, and so I was able to use that to actually kind of break my negative habits. We can get into all this of like I mentioned it on Paul's stream, and stuff. And then it was kind of self-reinforcing from there. Then I kind of had an upward trajectory a bit, because then I started to actually take pride in my work and stuff, and started to actually feel like I was contributing something. And then at the same time, and then a few years later, I started going back to school, and that also kind of helped improve my self-image. And eventually I got a girlfriend, and that also really, that did that was a massive, it's crazy. I wish it hadn't had that big of effect on my sense of self-worth. It would be better, it would be healthier if that didn't have a effect on but that first girlfriend that I got was that's such a
That
weird way
sounds
of saying
normal
it.
too, though. I've seen
Yeah.
that effect on many people. I think that's just a
Yeah.
natural part of being human.
Yeah. I guess I kind of bought into what I sort of call the in my family, it's very common. It's um the maybe the magic pill fallacy. Like, oh, it's not just going to be that you have this, one thing and then you'll be happy. It'll always be a next thing kind of thing. And like for a lot of things that makes sense. It's not like, if you get a new car, that you're just going to actually be, happy, because it's not going to solve your other issues and stuff. But it turns out in hindsight, and so that's what I thought that was the kind of the whole story with that. It's like, oh, I think if this thing's going to make me feel more complete and more happy, but that's not the way things work. We always return to the hedonic treadmill of, wanting something more. And I thought that's kind of what happened. And it turned out it was more that, there's sort of basic, needs of human connection that actually, once it's not a matter of like, oh, you won't actually be happy with it. No, it turns out that you will actually be happy sometimes. It's like being happy to, have water rather than be, perpetually dehydrated, or it's almost too on the nose. But like, or just like, yeah, like it's closer to fulfilling, basic psychological needs than it is to just wanting something for materialism's sake or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're social beings. I was at my absolute best, my healthiest, my most adult when I was with my partner. Like that was by far when I had that healthy, intimate relationship made all the difference.
Yeah.
Now, was it the like not wanting to let your friend down that was the initial motivation that allowed you to kind of start
Yeah,
progressing into something
it was.
constructive?
There was also like, yeah, it's what kind of gave me the strength to kind of to get myself to, out of all of these habits that I've been accumulating, just these negative spirals of self-sabotage. And then escapism, because you feel like your life's falling apart, but then it doesn't actually solve any of the problems. It just makes it worse. That kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I
I want to
stopped.
talk a little bit about that because I suffer from imposter syndrome myself really badly. You talked about
Yeah,
your feelings of inadequacy and lack of confidence, and how you learned validation, like the counselor helped you with validation. But are there kind of self-validating techniques or
oh yeah,
intrapersonal that you've learned to help overcome that?
yeah. And to your point about like what makes a good counselor, the point of no counselor should be, and there are bad counselors out there who will
Oh
try
yes.
to just, you know, give a man a fish rather than teach a man to fish in terms of validation. But to clarify, no, it's definitely all about, creating those strategies for you to use for validation, so that it is, an internal thing rather than, needing external stuff for that. Um, to be honest, it's still a bit of a battle these days, but now, um, but like as my list of things that I can kind of tell myself, like, no, I did that, and therefore I can do this. As that list grows, it does become a bit easier for me, and that's something that just, in some ways, is almost as a function of age. Like at first when you're young and you feel like you can do nothing, and then your mind will just grapple onto the, you don't even have that much to share. And then of course you get, maybe you'll get that first big win, but then if you like to self-sabotage and have imposter syndrome, your mind, you'll find a way to dismiss that. It doesn't count for whatever reason. And then
Yes.
once you get to a certain point of that, though, once you have this, like, I still get it a bit, even though, like I still feel like that the university could at any point be like, oh, we made this huge mistake, we never should have let you in, even though I literally just finished my master's degree. But that is what it feels like. It's
Oh yeah.
yeah, but it becomes easier to be like, no, I've done all of this, like, or like if I look at some of my like good writing that I've done, lately my writing has not been as good, but occasionally I'll just kind of look at things that I've written that like I'm actually like proud of, and it's just like, man, like I was doing good there, and that can help. um yeah, for me, just having the evidence, kind of pile up makes it easier to just to kind of combat those imposter syndrome things. Like, and you can, there's other strategies as well, but I think for me, that's been one of the larger ones is just like just actually seeing it over time. Um, yeah,
Yeah, like reviewing your personal history, and because with me it has to. I don't. Doesn't matter how many times other people tell me, it has to meet
yeah,
my standards that I have for myself, and I know when I'm doing what I consider good work or not, and
yeah,
that's what overcomes it for me. And lately, I've just learned to ignore it. Like
yeah,
with the self doubt, with the imposter syndrome, I do it anyway. I'm like,
yeah,
yes, I have all this going on in my head, but don't let that stop you from doing it. Just go do it anyway. It's okay to fail. If you fail, I do worst case scenario all the time. Just play out the worst case scenario, prepare for that, and you'll
yeah,
probably get somewhere above that.
yeah,
So I have these little
and
techniques for psyching myself out. But yeah,
yeah,
it's always there. I mean, the feeling.
yeah,
There's very little things that can dispel it, other than
yeah,
direct evidence that I can believe that meets my standards. Like it doesn't matter how many
exactly.
external people are telling me I'm doing a
Yeah,
good job. I have to see it myself.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't even matter that like it's amazing how common it is, and like it doesn't matter if you're the person who someone's coming up who you really respect because they and they're like, oh, I don't think I can do this, and it's just like, wow, how can you think you're so brilliant, how can you do that? And yet like be like 5 minutes later then you're the one in those shoes coming up to someone and you're like, I don't think I can do this, and they're like, what are you talking about, you did this and this. You're like, yeah, I know, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that comes up a lot with ADHD and the crowd I work with is emotional dysregulation or regulation. Do you struggle with that or have any for
I
helping
so I
regulate?
guess I don't that much with that one. Emotional regulation, I'd say I'm fairly good with. Um, yeah, I think all other sorts of criteria I meet pretty well, but emotional regulation, I'd say I'm pretty good with.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you're able to recover fairly
yeah,
quickly from an intense hit of emotion.
yeah, yeah, I think so. Um, yeah, yeah.
So, you got back into school and
Yeah.
you just got your master's. What is it looking like for you now?
So I'm talking to my boss about the specifics of but I'm gonna keep working for the same group that I'm with. I'm gonna be a research associate.
Are you
Um,
still at the refugee clinic?
clinic. So not directly. My research involves like the data from there, and I will go there occasionally, like to pull more data or stuff like that. But I'm no longer like working at the front desk of the refugee clinic. I was there for 10 years, and I still like talk to a bunch of the people there. But but yeah, I'm not directly working for them anymore. More for the university is where my paycheck comes from.
And you're going to do research?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm interested in, you mentioned that you kind of did, when you were at the refugee clinic, studies to improve outcomes and what some of
Oh
the
yeah.
strategies were that you came up with.
Oh, gotcha. So yeah, that was so there's this whole field actually that's not yet as well known as one would think, called like clinical quality improvement. And it's kind of fun because um you actually, unlike research which takes forever, research is a very slow process, in terms of um doing the study and analyzing the results and writing a whole paper and publishing that paper, and those last two steps can take like years. Versus quality improvement, you just find things to measure in the clinic, and then you try to measure them and then try to implement strategies to reduce them. So um one of the big ones was we like our no-show rate was somewhere around 25%, or at least it was between 20 and 25%, which isn't like crazy high for clinics, but like primary care clinics, but still uh it definitely like, but that's one of the ones that you most want to reduce, because if someone's booking an appointment for the doctor, I mean, I'd say especially at this clinic, just but other ones as well. Like it, because it's a lot of our patients are kind of fairly high, needs, especially at first, and it kind of decreases over time. But like you and they miss the appointment, then you still need to pay the doctor for the time, right? Because the doctor still needs to get paid, but also the patient still needs to be seen for the problem if they had an actual problem. And so you end up kind of costing yourself twice through no-shows. And it's really easy to save money if you can reduce the no-show rate. So for ours, like one of the biggest things there was we weren't using the phone interpretation. We have a phone interpretation service called Language Line, and we weren't using that for like the confirmation calls because it is expensive. It costs like $1 a minute for like interpretation stuff. That adds up pretty quickly, and so we thought, oh, we don't need to do that for these confirmation calls. But as we just discussed, no shows are also very expensive, and it turns out that once we started doing confirmation calls, we reduced the no-show rate down to less than 10%, around like 7%.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which is great. And so it was actually saving money for sure to use Language Line for those confirmation calls, because there's a lot of language barrier at the clinic. It's kind of one of the big things there. Yeah, so that was like one thing. There was like a booking slip that we because like so the patient would kind of go get all of these, have to do all of these tests, and if you're booking some lab tests, some diagnostic imaging, and like a specialist appointment, and if there's not something kind of there saying, hey, book this, this, and this, then you're just kind of hoping that the patient will tell you, or maybe the doctor will tell you, but the doctor's going to go see the next patient, sort of thing. So if you just have just a little booking slip there, like a piece of laminated piece of paper that you can just mark with a marker of what you want the medical office assistant at checkout to do, then that made a huge difference. Morning huddles was like another one, just kind of getting the team together. One of those things that like at jobs, like I've worked plenty of shitty jobs, like it doesn't make sense to do a morning huddle for like Starbucks, for example. But
That's probably where they do them.
yeah, yeah, and like Walmart kind of thing. But like morning huddles at when you're just kind of coordinating schedules and stuff in the morning can end up actually being at this clinic could actually be very useful, it turned out, because it's really easy to like just have a miscommunication. Then turns out that there was like that the doctor had no idea about the person coming in, kind of thing, because no one had communicated to them. They have to spend the whole time kind of more time reviewing this really complicated chart, versus if it just gets talked about in the morning, especially if it's like one of the nurses kind of telling them, then things can end up just running a lot smoother. And because at first we had no like kind of real standard processes, or at least not enough of them, as far as like what to do in XYZ situation. And the more that we sort of created those kind of processes and standards, the more we were able to improve our outcomes.
Wow. That's fascinating. I've worked in clinics, so this very much interests me. Just even having a checkout process at all, because I've worked in clinics that didn't even have a checkout process, and I kept asking, should we have them check out afterwards?
Yeah.
Oh no, the doctors gave them their order. Just let them go.
Yeah. Well, it's we did like it was a huge game changer for us. Honestly, the checkout, even the checkout position itself, like I was saying, that even that was a thing. That was one of the things, was like at first I was kind of beating myself up because I was not doing that great at that, but also I was like at one point I was, for the first 2 years, I was like the only medical office assistant at the front there. Then when they started adding, and eventually we were up to like 5. There might be more than this, might be like 6 MOAs at a time now. But at one point it was literally just kind of one person. Yes, the number of roles also expanded, like the number of things that the MOAs were doing expanded over time as well. But there was it definitely actually did not make sense to have just one person on it. It's so easy to, then if you have just two things that you need to do at once, already you're screwed. Like
Mm.
person is there that needs to, and also the phone is ringing, and also the doctor is saying something, and it's like, oh no, like I guess I can, the phone person can leave a message, and that way that I can, use my time afterwards. Like it's so easy to get a backlog so fast.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do for fun?
Um, hang out with friends, rock climb, surfing, running,
Oh
go to
man.
the gym a bit. Uh, Definitely a lot of nerdy stuff as well. A lot of video games and well, actually not that many video games, but when I get into a computer game, mostly I go hard.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I haven't had a chance for too much of that lately. But yeah, I don't know, read, watch movies, stuff like that.
Well, that is fun.
Mostly rock climbing is kind of my main one these days. I go rock climbing about 3 times a week at the moment,
Oh
and
man, I used to love to climb. I haven't gotten to do much of it. It's coming up here. Is there surfing in Alberta?
there actually is a little bit of river surfing. Yeah, there's it's not the same. It's not actually as easy as you would think in comparison to the regular, surfing, but it is just kind of different. The difference in buoyancy actually, you're much less buoyant in fresh water than in salt water, and we all kind of know that. But like, you can really feel the effect of that. It actually does make it a bit more challenging, especially if I haven't got a river surfboard. I've got an ocean surfboard, and so that kind of makes it a bit challenging actually. Um, and but basically, it's just to kind of keep yourself in sort of decent surfing shape so that you can actually go enjoy yourself when you make it out to the coast. Usually, at
Oh,
least
is it
that's in my experience.
rapids? Rivers
Yeah,
or
exactly.
rapids?
It's a standing wave in rapids. Yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah.
Well, is there anything that you want to close with or promote, or do you have any
Hmm. Uh,
websites or projects?
um, No, if yeah, people can follow me at Norification if they're into this stuff. There's gonna be this big conference in here in Calgary actually this year. Usually it's either in Toronto or somewhere in the States. But for my work, the well, not
Is
like
that on Twitter?
so the conference is but I'll be posting things about the conference on Twitter, and the North American Refugee Health Conference, and I don't know. So there might be some interesting things. Is what I'm saying. It's not, um, but yeah, I don't know. I actually don't have much of a. I should come up with sort of a takeaway message that I'm kind of going for, but for now, I'm just happy to be on shows like this. I've really enjoyed this, so thank you.
Oh yeah, I have too. I'm so glad you came on. If you ever want to come on again, just let me know. I think
Sure, yeah. I next time I'll try to be a bit more prepared. I feel like I did better than I usually do when I'm like unprepared here, but I'm better if I have a kind of a plan, more of a plan going into it.
Oh,
But
no, I think you did fine. I think the
oh, thank you.
conversation went everywhere that I was hoping it would go. We hit
All right, on.
many topics of interest, I believe. So,
I'm glad. Awesome. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes I don't have a great sense of that. The imposter syndrome, as we discussed. um, awesome. Well, thanks, man. This is
yeah,
great.
thank you. I'll go ahead and put your Twitter thing in the link if
Sure.
that's what you want
Sounds
me to
good.
do.
Yeah, yeah, that
Okay.
sounds good.
Well, have a good day. Keep being awesome, and I'll see you. We have in our town hall tonight too on
Oh
the
yeah.
PF Young Discord at
Right.
7:30 Central, I believe.
Right. 7:30 Central. I think that's 6:30 here. Okay, I might be able to make it, but I might be out. So we'll see. Anyways,
Okay. Well, maybe
might
I'll
see you
see you
then.
there.
Yeah, sounds
Okay.
good. All
Thanks
right. Okay,
again,
talk to you
Eric.
there.